You imagine seeing any of these characters? What would you call it? Oh, I would call that Homo erectus, and I would call this Homo floresiensis, and this one over here. No, you're not going to do that. That's ridiculous. You're going to be like, that's a freaking ogre, man. That right there is some kind of hobbit person. Just to put that in perspective, some of them we lived with for hundreds of thousands of years.
Now they will know why they are afraid of the dark. Now they will learn why they fear the night.
Welcome back. This time, I'm sure. Right. Well, last time we were talking about the beginnings of things. We were talking about in the beginning there was this and there was that. And we looked at how, well, the earth wasn't technically created until the third day of creation, as according to the book of Genesis in the Bible. So, technically, those days can't be 24-hour periods, which means that the 6 days in the Bible of creation aren't 24-hour periods, because there was no earth to turn in a 24-hour period. So, those must be figurative ideas. Now, a scholar named Philo, first century AD scholar, would agree. He would say that most of the things that were written in the Bible are not to be read literally, but figuratively. So, today, what are we going to look at? We're going to look at that time period between, well, let's say 5 million years ago, and roughly we're going to get up to about maybe 10,000 years ago. So that's what we're going to look at today. But in order to start that off, I thought I would let my friend Thulsa Doom from the Conan movie, I believe 1981 or 1982 Conan movie with starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, and of course the magnificent James Earl Jones as Thulsa Doom. And I just figured I'd start it off like this, because this is kind of the question I have.
Now they will know why they are afraid of the dark. Now they will learn why they fear the night.
Look, I don't really know why you fear the night. I got a pretty good idea, and it probably has something to do with the reason why I'm a little nervous at nighttime and why my daughter gets a little bit nervous at nighttime. And, well, it's because you can't see too much. Kind of like my last video, it was a little dark. I'm still kind of figuring things out. But yeah, you can't really see too well at night. And so all your other senses are super heightened, and everything is right up to your awareness, right? Everything is bang! Right in front of you. So you can't really ignore it. You hear a twig snap. Right? You see something out of the corner of your eye, you feel some rumblings on the ground. Oh, you smell something that you're not used to smelling. Your senses go crazy. Well, obviously that goes back into our evolutionary past, right? Obviously that goes back into another time. But I always wonder, why is it we have tales of goblins, trolls, ogres, giants, cyclopses, Wendigo, Bigfoot, you name it. All these seemingly human-like creatures that aren't really human, right? They're a little bit not, but kinda, right? Kind of like if we were watching a Star Trek episode, maybe we would say something like humanoid, right? Something like that. Something that's got 2 legs, 2 arms with hands that kind of look like these, and a brain that's big enough to be able to figure out what to do with them beyond, which is very important, by the way. Let's see if there's any evidence that would back up why we're afraid of the night, why we're afraid of the dark, why we're afraid of the boogeyman or some kind of weird beastie that lives out at night. It only comes out at night or operates at night. And something that's kind of human-like, something that's kind of like us, but when you look at them, you hit that uncanny valley, like watching those old digital movies. You look into their eyes and they kind of have like this weird dead eye thing going on. And it's because the animators hadn't figured out how to do the quantum refractory thing that light does when it hits your eyeball, the whites of your eyes. So anyway, it's that uncanny valley where you're seeing something that looks like a human, but is it really human? I wonder if we ever lived with creatures that could maybe stand in for these ogres and trolls, and maybe not orcs, because that was kind of something invented by J.R.R. Tolkien, but something that looks human but isn't quite. So we're going to look at prehistoric times today. Prehistoric times. So what are we going to look at? We are going to look at primates, start to look at the Stone Age in this episode, and then we're going to look at the beginnings of civilization for the next episode. Let's talk about history, okay? Now, a lot of people, when they say history, they're just saying about the past, right? They're just talking about the past in general. Something that happened a long time ago, and now we're talking about it. So that's not necessarily history as the definition of history goes, because the definition of history is everything since the invention of writing. So it's all kind of dependent on the invention of writing. So it's really like a story that was written down, okay? So history isn't everything that's happened in the past. It's just everything that's been recorded. Okay, it's important. Everything that's been recorded is actual history. So that means we only have roughly 6,000 years of history, and everything before that is really kind of conjecture, educated guesses based on other primary sources like artifacts, human remains, that kind of stuff, right? So prehistory then is the time before written records were kept. Because these people didn't write down their history, we have to do our best to figure out what happened. Now, there's an important distinction here to make too. Anything referring to the time before the written record is prehistoric, okay, because it happened before history. Now, any society that does not yet have the written word is considered a prehistoric society. There are prehistoric societies today that still exist. So that's something that still happens. All right, so just keep that in the back of your head. We went over this last time, but I'm just going to review really quickly. Archaeology, the study of past societies through an analysis of what people have left behind. The Thorpo version is the study of old people stuff. Old people stuff. Right. Artifacts are those things that people left behind. They can include tools and weapons, art and sculpture, pottery, jewelry, human remains, ancient buildings, and monuments. Right. Those are all artifacts that archaeologists would study. Anthropology is the broader idea, right? The study of human behavior, life and culture. Thorpo version, the study of people stuff, right? So if people did it, I study it, right? Okay, so carbon-14 dating, we went over that last time. So if you really want to get into depth of how carbon-14 dating works, you can go into the last episode. I go into it in detail. Thermoluminescence dating, I go into less detail there, but still you get a better idea of it. Okay, so now we're going to talk about hominids, okay? We're going to talk about what might be the inspiration for a troll or a goblin or an orc or something like that, right? Something that's kind of like human-like, but not a human, right? So, hominids are primates of a family that includes humans and their fossil ancestors, and also at least some of the great apes. So some of the great apes are considered hominids, okay? Humans and other creatures that walk upright on 2 feet. Now, I know there's this thing called hominin, which is kind of like what led to humans. I'm just, in general, talking about hominids, things that kind of look like humanish things, right? They have a larger brain, the ability to stand upright, make tools,
that kind of thing. So that's really what I'm talking about. Which, if you think about it, an orc or a troll or a goblin, right? They could do that. They weren't just beasts. They had some kind of cunning. They had some kind of thought, some kind of ability to reason things out, make traps and plots and all that cool, scary stuff, right? Okay, so first let's talk about primates. Okay, so if we're going to talk about hominids, we're going to talk about where humans evolved from. We got to kind of talk about the animal family that we most closely resemble. Now, I know this is kind of controversial because there are many people who do not accept the idea of evolution. That's fine, probably. But again, I think that's more based on the idea that the world isn't old enough for evolution to happen. But again, see last video, and you can see that the 6 days of creation were more close to billions of years than opposed to like 24-hour periods. Okay, so those were more of like epochs as opposed to actual days. I don't know if you don't accept that argument. Oh, that's fine. Feel free to go back to the last video and write it in the comments, and I would love to look at what you have to say and see if I can maybe move forward my thinking on it too. So in that spirit, we're going to look at primates, and we're just going to assume that we are more closely related to primates than any other animal on the planet. Okay, even if you want to say there's something more and special about us besides just our body, I mean, I would tend to agree with you, right? Especially when we start talking about Plato, where we'll talk about the body and that part of us which isn't the body, right? So I would tend to agree with you. But we're going to try to keep things relatively scientific in this episode because otherwise, I mean, we're already kind of talking about goblins and ogres and trolls and stuff. So I'm going to try to be as scientifically minded as possible while still keeping that neat idea of something really interesting being able to be added in. Again, so it's kind of like looking at the Big Bang versus the Book of Genesis. This is going to be kind of like the ideas of goblins and trolls versus the idea of primates and hominids. Okay, so, I mean, right off the bat, if we didn't have names for creatures like this, right, if we didn't have monkey and ape and gibbon and gorilla, I mean, we might call them something weird, like a goblin or something. I mean, they are very intelligent. I mean, they're kind of furry and hairy, but, I mean, you know, for a long time, gorillas were a myth until, I believe, the 1800s. They were just considered like this wild man that lived somewhere in the confines of Africa. You ever heard of the wild man of Borneo, right? That was this guy over here. That was the orangutan, right? They literally thought he was some kind of wild man. And you know, it's not that far off. They do have many of the same habits that we do. You know, they're kind of like, they're kind of like us. But these are primates. These are all primates. So we're going to break this down. How do primates work? Well, it kind of works like this. So at the top, you have primates. Okay, that breaks off into two different categories. One is prosimians, and the other one is anthropoids. Now, let's go to the prosimians first. Prosimians, the way I like to think of prosimians is kind of like, these are more like simians. They're more like monkeys. They're not like human-like. They're closer to monkeys than to humans, okay? That's kind of how I think of it, just so I can kind of remember that term prosimian, right? So pro meaning like for or active, right? More like simians, more like monkeys, right? So that's how I think of it. And there's two different branches for the prosimians. You had the lemuriforms, the tarsiiforms. Now, basically what that means is the things that are like tarsiers and the things that are like lemurs. And then, of course, that breaks down into lemurs and lorises, and the tarsiers are just the tarsiers. Now, these things are all prosimians. They look kind of like monkeys, but they're not quite monkeys. All right, so let's look over on the other side with the anthropoid side. Now, the anthropoid side, you basically have two different branches that come down, and one is the platyrrhines. I honestly, I've never heard these words before. These are just words that I've read, so I don't know if I'm pronouncing them right. So let's just say platyrrhines. I don't know, which means New World monkeys, or catarrhines, or Old World monkeys. So basically, Old World, whatever that means. That means like Africa, Asia, Europe, the old way of thinking, old world, new world. New world monkeys would be things that are coming from America. It's just New World is 2 syllables, and America, I don't know. It's easier to say Old World, New World. I'm done. Move on. I got more important things to say. I think that's why they use those terms. But of the New World monkeys, we've got these things called, Seboids, New World monkeys. And then if you go over to Old World monkey, you have the I'm sorry, a really long word that means Old World monkeys. But then under the Old World branches, you also have this other little branch that gives us the hominoids, or apes and man. Okay, so we're all the way over here. Okay, so essentially what happened was there was a big division here. These things look like lemurs from like the movie Madagascar, right? Those are all lemurs. And then even that branched off, but then you have primates, which went to Old World monkeys and New World monkeys. Old World monkeys branched off into 2, one being Old World monkeys, one being apes. Okay? Now, obviously there's further divisions, so just to give you guys a visual of what I'm talking about, here's what a prosimian basically looks like. Okay? This was essentially the first ancestor of all primates that we know of. When I made these slides roughly 7 years ago, was really the last time I really got into depth into the stuff. So there's kind of, you can kind of tell, it looks like an otter, cat, monkey, dog thing, right? But then there was this chap here, who is the dividing line between the prosimian ancestor and the monkey ancestor. And obviously you can tell that they are different. They look different. So what ends up happening is that this guy ends up turning into these guys, like the ring-tailed lemur that everyone is very familiar with, like Zabumafu, or what's his name there? King Julian from Madagascar, right? So that's the ring-tailed lemur. Now, I just picked these pictures because I thought they were awesome, because this one looks like he's meditating, but really, I think he's just trying to get something off the roof of his mouth. And this one looks like they're kissing, but really there's a berry in that lemur's mouth, and the younger one is trying to get it. So it's cute, but it's a child not leaving her parent alone so they could eat their berries. I don't actually have that problem, so I don't know why I'm making that face. All right. So this is also a lemur. I know that's a little confusing because, Thorpo, that looks like a mouse. It does. It does. That's because Madagascar doesn't have mice, and it doesn't have cats, and it doesn't have a lot of things. So you would see lemurs turn into all different shapes and sizes. I believe this is a bush baby. There's a cute little bush baby. Bush is so cute. Right? Those big old eyes and those little nimbly-bimbly fingers and toes. Yeah, it's really cute. But that's actually kind of closer to a human than it is to a mouse, really. Its brain is way bigger, and it can do a lot of cool things. It is nocturnal, which is why it's got those giant eyes. But this is also a lemur. This is called an eye. And just an example of evolution here. This guy has got a really long... That's not my middle finger. I promise. Okay, it's got a really long ring finger, and basically what he uses that to do is to stick that into insect burrows into trees and kind of you bring it out. And the thing is that worked well. Okay, so yeah, there was a lemur that was born with a really weird finger. And some really creepy eyes, too. Let's be honest. Those are creepy eyes. But it has a really long finger. And you would think that wasn't necessarily useful, but then, of course, he could fit his finger into holes in trees a lot further than other lemurs could, which meant that he was probably a little bit fatter and healthier and stronger than the other lemurs. And, there was probably some lady lemurs who thought that was kind of cool. And the reason I'm saying that it was probably a male that was born with the weird fingers is typically in dimorphic species, that's species that do show male and female of the species. The male tends to be more experimental. Nature is like, well, we're gonna try something, and men really vary. When I say men, I mean males. They vary widely. If you were gonna look at like a bell curve, right, you would say that there's all these on one end and all these on the other end, and the average isn't too high. Whereas like the females are very stable and very solidly average. And again, I'm talking around across the vast majority of species that are dimorphic, again, that have two, either a male and a female of those species. So nature tends to take chances with the male, is what I'm saying, because when compared to females, males are more expendable. You don't need as many to propagate the species. Just saying. So, the idea is that this guy was really successful, and that probably attracted a mate. And so his long finger got passed on, right? And this is kind of how that happens. Now, there may be some other kind of mechanism where there's a need in the environment, and so maybe there's something we don't understand quite yet with the epigenetics of things, and maybe there's some switches that are turned on that wouldn't normally be turned on if you're in an environment that required that to happen. Like, for instance, I know human beings may or may not have an obesity gene, and if they don't turn that gene on by eating a lot of, processed carbohydrates, they may not become obese. But if they do turn that gene on, well, then they're in a world of hurt. So it's that kind of idea. So maybe the environment selects. Maybe the environment does that. I wouldn't be surprised. But then again, I'm not a geneticist, so I couldn't really tell you. So I'm just going to have to move on. So the idea is these are all lemurs, and this is kind of how evolution works. In Madagascar, there weren't other animals, so when it kind of like fell away from, that's a really terrible term, not a geologist, when it kind of broke away from Africa, there weren't other creatures on that island at that time. So all the little environments, all these microenvironments in Madagascar were filled by lemurs. And over time, they became very much like their counterparts on the mainland. You would have a lemur that would take the spot of a rodent, or you would have a lemur that would take the spot of a cat, or you would have a lemur that takes the spot of a tree monkey, or blah, 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 blah. You get the idea. Those niches, as we like to say, need to be filled by something, and the only thing they could be filled in by was the lemurs. All right. So, old world monkeys. Just some examples of some old world monkeys. You got your macaques. You got your mandrills. Your baboons, right? You got your proboscis monkey, which means nose, big nose. It's got that giant nose there. You got these really cool monkeys that like to I'm sorry, because they're the ice, you see. They're cool. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, these really cool monkeys who love to go into hot springs. So if you like to go into a hot tub, you're not unusual. It's not unusual to go into a hot tub. That's a little unusual. So we'll just forget I did that, and we'll pretend I didn't. Okay, New World monkeys. New World monkeys, the things that really kind of characterize New World monkeys is the fact that they have prehensile tails. Prehensile tails. What does that mean? That means they can do things with their tail. They can hang from things with their tail. They can grab stuff. So you see this character right here. He's hanging from his tail. You got your capuchin monkey, which is famous from Night at the Museum, movies like that, where he's slapping people. Really cute. These are all American monkeys, right? You got your howler monkey, tarsier, I believe. Is that a tarsier? No, it can't be a tarsier. Might be. I don't know. It's one of those little cute little monkeys. They're little birds. They're that big. Anyway, they're cute. It's probably not a tarsier. I'll put it in the video. Anyway, so that's a difference. Basically, you have these monkeys who are bigger, can't really use their tails for much, except for swatting flies. Then you have these New World monkeys who can use their tails to grab and climb. So again, that's the difference. Just to show you, when we're going to talk about apes, just to show you kind of like how we're similar. Now, this is important. This is important. We're similar. We did not evolve from any apes that are currently existent today. So that may make a lot of people feel better because they're like, oh, I didn't evolve from any ape. No, well, you didn't evolve from like a chimp. You didn't evolve from... It's not like there was a chimp somewhere who had like a really creepy looking baby who didn't have any hair and a big bulbous forehead and, you know, this weird protuberance out of their face. Chin. That's not what happened, right? What did happen is something way more gradual, and that makes way more sense than chimpanzees giving birth to people. Didn't happen. Okay. But just to show you how close we are to chimpanzees, we're like 98.8% the same. Like, we are very much the same. We're only 1.2% different. From gorillas, we are 1.4% different. So just a little bit more different, but we're still pretty close. Orangutans, we're actually pretty far away from orangutans, which is funny that people thought that they were like people. They're like the one great ape that is like furthest away from our evolutionary line. So it's kind of interesting that they thought that. But I mean, it's more human-like than, say, I don't know, macaque. So I guess I kind of get it. All right, so here are our most close relatives, right? Here's orangutan, not so close. Although you can watch videos on YouTube of orangutans spearfishing. So pretty darn human-like. And, I mean, they can do sign language, a whole bunch of stuff. Obviously, we know that chimpanzees and gorillas can do sign language. They're very capable. They have giant vocabularies. It's very impressive. So just to point out, these are bonobos. They're a little bit different than chimpanzees. They're actually even closer to us percentage-wise. I think they're like 1.1% the same as us. They're really close to us. They're basically chimps, but culturally very different, which is very interesting from an anthropology perspective. Chimpanzees are... Well, when they want to solve a problem, they might just tear your face off, bite your face, bite other parts that you don't want to be bitten. They will gang up together and like start a war with another tribe of chimps and like take all their females. They'll like creep through the forest completely silently, like a bunch of ninjas, and then just go in there and just start tearing throats out. They're not that lovey-dovey. I mean, they can be, obviously, like any animal can be sweet, but they definitely have this really nasty streak. I mean, chimps will eat monkeys like butt first while they're still alive and screaming. Chimps. Okay. I mean, here's the thing. Bonobos may do that too. I honestly don't know if they... I find it hard to believe because bonobos, they're very affectionate. So whenever like two bonobo meet or, meet up again or say hi, they'll hug and they'll kiss. And then they'll hug. And pretty much they'll hug anybody. Except moms won't hug sons. But everybody else will hug everybody else. Men will hug men. Women will hug women. So you can look at it like this. Chimps are more the fighters. Bonobos are more the lovers. But you can kind of see that they do have that that same kind of thing that humans have. They have that dual nature, right? I know it's kind of uncomfortable. But, hey, let's talk about the gibbons real quick. The gibbons are actually kind of cute because they're actually even more dimorphic than your average ape or other animal. They're literally different colors. So males will be black with white highlights on them, and females will be this neat, like, blondish color. And all babies will be blondish in color until the boys reach maturity, and then their literal fur will turn black and white. It'll go from blonde to black and white. It's interesting because actually when I was a child, my hair was like bone straight and like platinum blonde. And now it's like really dark brown and kind of curly, which is why I keep it short. So it's just interesting. There's these commonalities throughout these, throughout the primates. All right, so just to show you the difference between apes and humans, okay? We diverged, like if you look at this over here, my cursor, 7 million years ago, okay? So we had a common ancestor with chimps 7 million years ago. A common ancestor. That's not like we evolved from chimps. We didn't. We shared an ancestor 7 million years ago. So we went one way, chimps went another way. Okay, so we did not evolve from chimps. Didn't happen. Chimps evolved on their own, we evolved on our own. Okay? We shared an ancestor 7 million years ago. Guys, million. It's a long time ago. Okay? It's a totally different animal. But the most important thing I want to show you on this is this right here, guys. Do you see this? Do you see all these names of these are all hominids. They're all hominids. Now, it's actually cool because this chart is wrong because now we know that Homo sapiens, well, actually no, that's actually pretty good. That's actually pretty good. But if I could hold up if I could hold up my hand here, right? And we could kind of Homo sapiens, we can kind of see that we intersect with 1, 2, 3, 4 other species of hominids. We lived at the same time with them for at least 100,000 years for some of them for 20,000 years. Now, just to put that in perspective, some of them we lived with for hundreds of thousands of years. Hundreds of thousands of years. We only have 6,000 years of history. But we lived with these other creatures for hundreds of thousands of years. We only have 6,000 years of history, but we've hung out with these creatures for hundreds of thousands of years. You get what I'm saying? Now you will learn. You can see that these are the suspected time for them to exist, and the darker brown is the sure time that they were around. But you can see that these all overlap. I mean, they overlap with Neanderthals, Heidelbergensis, Pekinensis, Homo rhodesiensis, Homo ancestor, Homo florensis, which are the hobbits, which if you are really into J.R.R. Tolkien or Lord of the Rings, you would love to know that there were 3-foot people running around with us at the same time. Now, that could just be only in Indonesia. Remember that for next class. Because we're going to take a look at Indonesia, and we're going to see that Indonesia wasn't just a chain of islands. Just a comparison of skull sizes of our. This would be that weird-looking monkey thing that I showed you in a couple of slides earlier. Then Australopithecus, which is our Lucy. Homo habilis, which is the first hominid to really make tools that we would consider took a lot of thought. Then we have Homo erectus. So you can see that Homo neanderthalensis, or Neanderthals, had pretty giant skulls. And actually, this is misleading because, as it turns out, Neanderthals actually had bigger skulls than we did, which means their brains were potentially bigger than ours as well. There's a lot of speculation about that. We'll go into that in a little bit later, but some think it's because they had larger memory centers, which are at the back of their brain, as opposed to the cognitive centers, which we have in our front of our brain, which is why we have this forehead, and we'll get into that. Okay, so this is just a cool kind of artist rendering of, our ancestors moving from Lucy again to Homo habilis, who was shorter but his brain was bigger, and then Homo erectus, whose brain was a little bit bigger than Homo habilis, but he was a much taller. Matter of fact, the same size as us today. I mean, his body is almost indistinguishable from ours today. It's very similar. Very, very similar. And then you have Homo neanderthalensis, which is quite different from us, actually. We'll get into that too. And then, of course, we have Michael Keaton. It just really looks like Michael Keaton. I don't know what to tell you. A lot. Anyway, modern day humans. Notice he's got like no hair on him. Well, he's got a little hair on him, but it's not compared to these other guys. But so here's another picture. Now look, if this doesn't prove my point, or at least illustrate my point about hominids probably being the reason we have all these stories of ancient, goblins and trolls and stuff, just look at these characters. You imagine seeing any of these characters? What would you call it? Oh, I would call that Homo erectus, and I would call this Homo floriensis, and this would be... No. You're not going to do that. That's ridiculous. You're going to be like, that's a freaking ogre, man. That right there is some kind of hobbit person. You got an ogre over here. Look at that. Ogre. Troll. Ogre. I don't know. This guy wears clothes, but it's terrible. He's going to stab you in the face a lot. That's not fun. Right? This guy will freaking eat you. He'll eat you. He'll eat you. I mean, could be that Neanderthals ate us too. But, not that we should be too excited about that, because we kind of ate each other sometimes. I mean, that happened in history. There's like historical accounts of us eating us. And it's always like really disturbing. Maybe I'll get into that later. Yeah, like the accounts. Oh, you don't want to know who tastes better. That's not a thing you want to know. You just don't want that in your head. You know what I mean? So anyway, so they're all different and stuff, but obviously they look like people to a degree, but not. I mean, this one kind of looks like Alf. I mean, this is kind of my favorite. He's just hairy and looks like Alf. If you don't know who Alf is, I'm sorry. You didn't grow up in the 80s, and you should look it up. It's fairly funny. Kind of holds up. Yeah. Anyway, and this goes into all these different kind of explanations. But I did want to talk about specifically our first official ancestor, and that is Ardi, or Ardipithecus ramidus. Okay, now the reason she has become kind of our earliest ancestor is because she did walk upright. Her brain, though not really super impressive, comparable, I would say, to chimpanzees. And I know many people are like, oh, it looks like a chimpanzee. No, dude, it doesn't, because she's standing upright. She can almost lock out her knees. Her head is, it's not like super like this. It's, I mean, it is. It is kind of still on that weird angle that other apes have. But you can see that, she still has, opposable thumbs on her feet, and she's got them on her hands. Her arms are longer than a typical human's would be. So we are assuming that she was arboreal, meaning that she spent a lot of time in trees. And I keep saying she because the specimen we found was a female. Okay, so that's why I keep saying she. So Ardi is a her because, just like Lucy was a she. Anyway, so even though she was arboreal, which means she could travel around in the trees very handily, but also because she could walk around and stand up, which is a huge advantage if you want to see bad guys coming, because you can see further because you're taller. Physics, right? Anyway, so there is an artist's rendering of what Ardi may have looked like. Those eyes, man. It's the eyes that get me, because obviously not a human, but there's something there. Maybe it's just me. I don't know. It looks like there's something there. Anyway, there she is. So Lucy is the who we thought was the first hominid for a long time. That's who we thought it was. And that's artist rendering. Obviously, these aren't real specimens. These are, someone who took the projected skeleton of this creature and then fleshed it out based on, studying other life forms and how bones attach to muscles or vice versa and that kind of stuff. And then so they can kind of figure this out. But a lot of it is a lot of educational guesses because we don't have an actual specimen to really take apart. So that might come in handy in a little bit. So then again, this is a very sickly version of Lucy. She looks very sad in that one. But anyway, Lucy used to be considered the first of the hominids. They're thought to have emerged in East Africa in the Great Rift Valley between 3 to 4 million years ago. Artie, even longer than that, roughly 5 million years ago. Okay, so that's where at the beginning of the video I was saying 5 million years ago. Okay. So here was the next.